I'm originally from Iran. I came to Canada, to Toronto in 2008 to start my PhD in quantum computing. And I was here until 2014. And that's when I met Daniel Young. If you remember, Daniel, in 2014, I stayed in your place in an Airbnb when I was actually moving to England.
Yes, I remember that.
Yeah, and so then I went to England. I worked at University of Oxford for 2 years. Did a bunch of research there, still in the same area of quantum computing. When I was halfway through that, I sort of tried to do a quantum tech startup company. That didn't go anywhere because there was barely any market for quantum computing 5 years ago, and so I then decided that at that point I was sure that I didn't want to stay in academia and I wanted to go to industry, and I decided that probably the best next thing is AI. So I started teaching myself that. And then, I actually came back to Canada and started working as a data scientist at Royal Bank. I was there for 2 years. I was a data scientist for less than a year. I was pulled into management pretty quickly. And I didn't love that much. So I sort of pivoted and sort of steered my direction towards product management. That was more interesting than just generic, people management. And, that was more fun, but it's still not fun enough. So I left RBC about a year ago, more than a year ago, to focus on my company. I actually incorporated the company about 2 years ago. So sort of I was doing half-time at RBC and full-time on a company. And then about a year ago, I just stopped and, quit RBC and focused on a company. So I've been building, we've been building a product in a company for about a year. The focus of what we're building is mostly around accelerating AI product development, which means that we're building a set of tools that will help people make better product decisions. And a lot of it is around knowledge discovery. So we curate a lot of content, and we run a series of workshops that actually have evolved to something very interesting today. So essentially now we have these workshops where people learn AI product development, machine learning engineering, and some machine learning topics, and use all of that to build some AI-based web applications. And the interesting evolution that has happened is that now we also bring in companies that give problem statements. For example, starting next week, we are bringing in a fintech company that is posting a problem in the domain of financial technology. And we are using AI to solve that problem. And there will be a bunch of teams who will compete to build the best web application for that, for a chance to win a cash prize that the company is providing. So we are doing, a bunch of interesting stuff there. And, hopefully we'll figure out where we are going next. That's a very rapid fire journey, I guess. I'm going to pause because I don't want to talk more than I should. And I prefer, to answer questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Amir. So please, if you have questions, Amir has been generous to say that he would prefer that the people on this call should ask questions first. So please ask your questions, type in your question, but while you're typing in your question, so that we don't have an awkward silence, so maybe Amir can take one from the one that has been asked earlier.
Sure. Let me see. All right, I'll start with the second question. So they are saying that they are an accountant and they want to move their career towards machine learning. They're doing a degree at York University, like a data science diploma, and they want to figure out where to go from there. Mm-hmm. So I'm going to generalize that question a bit and answer it like this. So essentially, one of the most important things I usually recommend that people do is to really think about what their strength is, because a lot of people that I talk to that are considering transitioning to data science and machine learning usually forget to emphasize what their strength is. Like, for example, I talk to people who have been a software engineer for more than a decade, and then they're talking about data science as if, you know, it is something that has nothing to do with software engineering, although it does have a lot to do with that. So, you know, really understanding what your strength is very important. Like, for example, in this case, they are saying they're an accountant. So, you know, accounting, like the domain knowledge of accounting is your strength. Therefore, you know, when you're thinking about doing stuff in data science, you should really think about what is happening in data science that is close to accounting. And, you know, maybe a very good starting point would be there because you have domain knowledge that most of the, you know, typical data scientists don't have that domain knowledge. So definitely that's one important piece to take into account. The second thing is about, I guess the second nuance of that question is doing degrees and diplomas and et cetera, at universities, boot camps, et cetera. My personal opinion about that is that the degree itself is not going to necessarily help you to get a job, because, you know, just the fact that you add a line to your resume that says, I don't know, I did this thing at university or whatever, that's not going to make a difference. There are going to be a lot of people who have done similar things. So ultimately, from a hiring manager point of view, what is most relevant is what can you do? That's ultimately what matters. And, you know, from a hiring manager point of view, again, there is a reason that I'm hiring. So, and that reason is that I want to solve a particular business problem I have. You know, I have extra headcount and budget. I want to hire somebody to work on a particular business problem. Unless you can communicate to me that you can solve that problem, I'm not going to hire you. Therefore, you know, the fact that you have a diploma is not going to make a difference. So are, you know, 600 other people. So, you know, when I'm saying that, I'm not discouraging you from doing diplomas and such. But what I'm saying is, when you're doing that, you have to constantly think that how can I use this thing to come up with, say, a project, I don't know, whatever is going to happen that will position you uniquely to solve the hiring manager's problem, and that's why they will hire you. The fact that you have diploma is almost irrelevant. But, you know, if, for example, you're coming from a background that is like very different, like not quantitative, et cetera, doing boot camps, diploma, et cetera, is going to be very helpful for you to build up the skills. But then you have to figure out how to use those to do something interesting that makes you unique when you talk to hiring managers. So that's another important part that I usually emphasize when I talk to people. In terms of, you know, setting goals, like that was another part of that question, like how to set goals and steps. You know, obviously, the ultimate goal is that you want to get hired. So you sort of have to work backwards from there to where you are today. Like, what are the skill sets that you're missing? Like, do you know enough Python? Like, have you done enough projects? You know, do you know enough machine learning, et cetera, et cetera? So if you don't know any of these components, you need to work on those and, you know, improve your skill. Normally having a mentor is going to be super helpful. there is this company called Sharpest Minds, sharpestminds.com. So they actually, like, the service that they have is actually matching you with a mentor who will work with you to build your portfolio, et cetera, et cetera. So if you are at a point where you're asking, how should I set goals? Where should I go from here, et cetera, most probably having access to a mentor is going to be very, very helpful for you. And okay, I talked too much. That's it.
All right. Thank you so much, Amir.
No problem.
Please, do you have, if there's anyone on this call with questions, please go ahead and ask your question. Aswat, you have a question? Go ahead.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
So hi, Amir. Thanks for joining us today. So my question is, how did you personally teach yourself data science? Right, like there are various aspects to it, right? Right from data collection to data visualization, ML algorithms to deployment. So for someone like who's new, like I have an automobile engineering background, and like I'm looking to transition to data science, and like I also have an MBA, so I'm looking to get into the business aspect of data science. So how did you teach yourself? Like I'm like sort of like very fuzzy on which aspect to focus on first, because like there are so many things to look into.
Ultimately, okay, let me tell you what I look at when I pick up somebody's resume when I want to hire them. I almost don't look at anything beyond the projects, because most of the other sections are going to be very, very similar for most people. Like if you don't have a bunch of basic things that I care about, most probably your resume wouldn't even get to me. Because there is a recruiter that usually looks at the resumes, et cetera, et cetera. So if your resume ends up on my desk, it means that you have the basics. So what I care about at that point is what can you do? So I'm going back to what I said earlier. And the best signal of what you can do is not your degree, is not your certifications, is not how many Coursera courses you got, et cetera, et cetera. It is about what kind of projects have you done, and is any of those projects something similar to what I'm trying to do, right? So unless, for example, I'm specifically hiring for algorithm design, I'm not going to care that you have a master's in whatever. So unless, in other words, unless I'm looking for a very, very specific type of data scientist, most of the general purpose data science roles are not going to care about a lot of details of your qualification beyond, what can you do? And the best place that I can see what you can do is what kind of projects you've done and how are you talking about them. Like both of these are extremely, like you might have done this marvelous project, but you can't talk about it. As a data scientist, you're talking to business all the time. So that's going to be a very bad sign. Or, you might talk very well, but it is all fluff. Again, like you have to have both of those. So, so the way I would think about it is, can you do interesting projects? What is an interesting project you can do? What skills do you need to do that? Like your goal should be, I want to do an interesting, exciting, unique project. And then from that, work backwards. Do I need to learn more about data collection? Do I need to learn more about cleaning, modeling, delivery, et cetera, et cetera? Like that, like you shouldn't think about it bottom up, really. You should think about it, top down. Your goal is ultimately interesting projects. What skills are you missing? Now, there's obviously the problem. What does it mean to have an interesting, unique project? I usually would recommend, do something that you're personally passionate about, because then it's very likely that in an interview, sometimes in interviews, they would ask you, walk me through an interesting project that you've done. And obviously you want to pick your best project. So if it is a project that is interesting, complex, blah, 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 but you're not personally passionate about it, you might just say things, but your passion is not going to reflect. But if you have done an interesting project that you're also personally very passionate about, your sheer energy when you're talking about it is going to reflect. It's going to affect the person that is looking at you. So that's always a good place to start. And everybody has personal interests that overlap with some interesting data problems. So I don't know, if you're a sports fan, you can find, I don't know, NBA stats and do something interesting with that. If you're, I don't know, an art fan, you can do some computer vision stuff, etc. Like there are really unlimited things that you can do. If you're still lost and you don't know where to start, going to Kaggle, seeing what kind of projects companies are posting there is a good place to start. But sufficing to that is a bad idea because, again, I go back, the most important thing is uniqueness. If you've done the Titanic project on Kaggle, so did 3 million other people. Like, what is unique about you? But if you picked up that data set and combined it with 6 other data sets and turned it into a much more interesting problem about climate change somehow, then that's an interesting problem. That's a unique problem statement that you solve. So I said a lot of things. Long story short, figure out what makes you unique, figure out what project you can do to achieve that, figure out what skills you're missing to do that, and just keep repeating that until you have enough projects on your portfolio that hopefully one of them is going to stick and absorb somebody's attention. Does that answer your question?
The second part of the question, or the first part, was like, how did you personally teach yourself? Like, did you do online courses, or you read a lot of books?
I did it in a very, very stupid way because nobody told me what I'm telling you. So I thought that I should just take courses and certifications and shit, and that's what I did for a while and wasted a bunch of time until much later, like probably I took about probably around 8 months or so to prepare. Like I had the math foundation, I had the coding foundation. I just needed to learn, the machine learning stuff, and probably like almost 6 months into my journey, somebody was like, "Why are you wasting your time on this certification? Just do a bunch of interesting projects." And then it was then that I actually started to figure out what are the things that I really needed to learn. And actually, I can't be sure, but I'm pretty sure that the job that I got at RBC at the time was because of one of the personal projects that I worked on, because I did a relatively interesting natural language processing problem that was just completely made up by myself. And in the interview, the guy asked me, "What's your most interesting project?" And I walked him through that, and I was like super excited and animated about it, et cetera, et cetera. And I think that really made an impression on him, and they offered me the job. So yeah, I did a bunch of stupid things for a long time, but then I learned that I should do projects is the short answer.
Thank you, Amir. So are you saying that project trumps certifications?
Oh, by far, by far.
Okay. And
like, again, think about it. Does X make you unique? If the answer is 100,000 other people have this exact same thing, the answer is no. Therefore, it's not going to help you.
Thank you so much for that. And a follow-up question to what Aswat asked was, is that, so at what point do you say, for example, somebody is doing a job that does not align with their passion, but at some point they now thought, you know what, I want to do something that I'm passionate about, but then they would have to start all over again. And they have a family, they have bills to pay. And so it's like they will have to like go down in pay and also in their career. What's your best advice for someone like that?
That's a $1 million question, isn't it? If there was a good answer to that, everybody would have been happy with their jobs. No, I mean, that's a big challenge a lot of people have. Like I was fortunate enough not to have a lot of, I don't have a big family. It's just myself and my girlfriend. And, I didn't have a lot of the burdens that a lot of people have. And I completely understand that this decision that I made, for example, is going to be significantly harder for many other people, like they have mortgage, family, et cetera, et cetera. And definitely that's not an easy decision. So my suggestion for situations like that is, again, going back to something that I said much earlier is, again, relying on your strength. The very, very first thing that you have to think about is, can I do something in my current role that gets me closer to that? For example, if I'm working as a business analyst, can I do whatever that gets me closer to a data analyst? If I'm working as a data analyst, can I do whatever to get me closer to a data scientist? And, if you look hard enough, there's always those opportunities around you. If you're a data analyst, you're handling a lot of data. Just, pick up some of it and build a bunch of models with it. You could even pitch those to your manager and, they might be open-minded enough to do something with it. So, of course, not everybody is going to have opportunities like that, but some companies even have like a job shadow kind of stuff. So you can definitely explore the opportunity, especially if you're in a bigger company. They have a lot of, like, if you're in a big company, they would be very worried about losing you. So they have all sorts of programs to keep you engaged, et cetera, figure out what those are and get engaged in them. Worst come to worst, start doing something on the side, like, do some personal project. It doesn't have to be immediately dropping out of what you're doing. Like myself, like I worked part-time for a year before I pulled the plug completely. Like I didn't want to just go immediately from, whatever my high salary was to $0 a month without having a bit of traction first. So it can definitely do a lot of work just on the evenings and weekends and all of that. Again, like family responsibilities, etc., is going to make it harder, but it's not impossible. You can just do good time management to figure it out. So de-risk as much as you can. Use opportunities that already exist around you. Like I don't buy it at all that there's nothing I can do. Like unless your manager is an asshole who doesn't want to allow you to do anything, which is usually not the case. Which is you shouldn't even work for that person at all. So if that's not the case, then in most cases you can come up with some interesting projects to do on the side that will get you closer to your goal, and you just take it one step at a time until you get closer to where you want to go.
Thank you so much for that holistic and detailed answer. I really, really appreciate it. That's so good. And to your points, I think, not that I think, all your points are very valid. And some of my takeaway from what you said is experience Trump certification, do a side project, speak to your manager, be open, ask questions, and don't give excuses. Thank you so much for that. So is there any other person?
One thing that I would say, though, is like sometimes when I say experience is more important than certification, some people misunderstand that as saying that don't do it at all. And that's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is if you're doing a certification, don't rely on that alone. Like sometimes you're coming from a background that you just need to do a bunch of groundwork to even have the basis for what you need to do. And a lot of the time it comes in form of different certifications. So it might be necessary, but it's not sufficient is what I'm saying. All right, so there are 2 questions in the chat. They were sent to me directly, so I'm going to take a look at those. So one question is that they are a PhD in physics, they have programming and mathematics background and taking some courses, and they're not sure where to look for a job in data science. I'm actually not sure what the question, Like, what do you mean? Like in a sense that...
Can the person ask the question directly so that Amir can
yeah, that would
provide context to it?
Hello.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. This is Mehdi
Mehdi.
talking. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Yes.
Yeah. So I'm a newcomer, and I've been here like for 3 or 4 months. And my previous job was in physics, developing models and like solving nonlinear equations and stuff. And so the physics, community and market is very small in Canada. So it's really hard to find a job. And so I figured out that it is good to like take my experience in dealing with modeling and writing codes into data science. And then, but the data science is like huge.
Yep.
It's range from quantum computing and like things like that. Data collection and stuff. That's my daughter, by the way. Sorry. And then, yeah, she just decided to scream. And so, I feel a little bit lost because like there are so many different aspects in the field. And so I started like taking some courses in Ryerson, and I learned a little bit of machine learning, deep learning, neural network. And so, but maybe my question is like, with the PhD in physics and a little bit of coding, is there any hope to get a job, or I need to like build a lot more of, machine learning and projects and stuff, then I can go for a job? I would be happy to do that like for a year or so. I'm just frustrated that if I am just applying for jobs and, it's just a waste of time. I prefer to do something, not constructive.
I'm going to give you a non-answer to that question because there is no good answer, really. The most important thing is, don't think about it as wasting time if you try to apply now and don't go anywhere. It is learning. Like, you're figuring out what about your profile is it that, people don't like. You might end up being lucky and somebody is exactly looking for what you have to offer on your resume and hire you right away. And that's the best outcome. Worst case scenario, you send the resume to a bunch of people and they're not interested and you just continue doing your projects. I mean, what is there to lose, right? So that said, you can definitely manage your time. Like, you spend 20% of your time on trying a few applications and 80% on building your portfolio. And as I said earlier, portfolio is extremely important because, again, like when I look at your resume, my question is, can you solve my problem? And the only way that I can know that is not through degrees and et cetera, is through what projects have you done. That's the best signal of me thinking that you're capable of solving my problem. So like for somebody like with your background, you definitely have the math and coding skills, most probably. So that's not the problem. The problem is building something that is tangible, and then you can show it and talk about it in a, data sciencey way. And, having come from physics background, I have experienced firsthand that there are a lot of things that we talk about them differently in physics than they talk about it in statistics and data science, especially in business. So just learning the language takes a bit of work, and like doing projects is definitely going to help. But just, building that confidence, building a few projects is going to take, I don't think it's going to take a year, but, at least a few months, up to 6 months, I would say, would be necessary to do that. For those who, like I mentioned our workshops, but the purpose of, the way that we do those workshops, they're like 6 weeks long. They're like super on to the point, like very rapid fire, learn the most important things right away and build a project. Like, we don't give certificates to people because of the philosophy that I have. The outcome of that is a web application. And that's exactly why we are doing it this way, because a lot of people are like yourself, thinking, I know all of these things, but I don't know how to apply it. So we provide, this medium where like even with the new evolution that we have, like literally a business problem that you pick up, work on it, build an application for it. Then when you go to your interview, that's a super concrete thing to talk about. So things like that, like I'm not necessarily saying do our program, although you can, and I'm happy to provide a discount to folks here. And the next one starts on Monday, actually. But you know, there are a lot of options like that. Like as I said, literally pick up something from Kaggle, modify it, make it interesting, make it your own, and build it into a project. So, and that's the sort of thing you want to show. Does that answer your question?
I mean, you mean like, I don't know, putting it on GitHub, like having projects on GitHub is more important than having like certificates, I guess.
Oh, by far, yes, definitely.
Okay, I see.
Yep.
Oh, thank you so much.
Like if, even better than GitHub is a web application that is live and is using your GitHub code. Like if on your resume, you tell me that this is my project, this is the GitHub link, this is the link to the web application. You know, it might not be super practical, but if you can pull up something like that, that would be the ultimate interesting thing, because I can literally see the web application you built that tells me you understand a bit of web development, which is not super necessary, but it's definitely a good sign. You figured out a way to deploy a model, and you know, unless your web application looks super ugly and impossible to work, you have figured out how to build something that is at least minimally usable. And if it is doing something interesting, you know, that definitely is going to catch my eye. That's another part of what we do in our workshops, that we help people make short videos about what they build to promote it, to essentially tell a story about it. And that's like, again, like I'm not doing a sales pitch saying, you know, come to our workshops. I mean, you're welcome to, but what I'm saying is the GitHub link alone is good, but whatever you can, write a blog post, create a short video, put it on YouTube, whatever you can to put on your resume that tells a story about what you did as well, which could include the web app, which could be just a blog post, etc., etc. Just read a bit about personal branding. That's ultimately what you're doing with all of these things. So if you can do anything that helps amplify and magnify what you've done, then you're good. Like if you have a few of those, then you're gold.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
So Daniel asked a question, Amir. He said, I would like to ask questions.
Oh, I saw somebody was before me.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
No?
Is there some, do you have some questions, Amir?
Yeah, there's a second question here, so let me read it.
Okay.
So somebody is saying they have math background and they're wondering, okay, I guess what I told Mehdi is pretty much the answer to the same question. Like we can have a, you know, one-on-one to discuss more directly what that means for you, but I think the same answer. All right. So Daniel is asking.
Right. So, I mean, I want to ask a question about data and system, as well as obviously the language or optional language, and certainly, I guess, the impact of the selection of the language that you opt for. So, I mean, Amir earlier give a little bit of introduction, but to everybody else, but we sort of have a little bit personal contact, personal level. We know a little bit back in the day, and Amir is actually the one who really got me interested in data scientists, and he invited me to a few other meetup sessions that he hosts or co-hosts. So that really got me into the field to know more about, I guess, not just the data analysis. That's what I do in the past already, and really more moving into a more, I guess, empirical evidence approach and statistically analysis and whatnot. So basically, it's really more into the data scientist field. But to share with the I guess the crowd here. So I am working in the small bank in risk management, and one of my big task or job scope is basically to build our internal risk model. And the model is to use to predict the loan losses. So basically, the model will be used when somebody actually apply for the mortgage. And obviously, we will give an internal rating and see what's the rate that guy might qualify. And eventually, you need to go keep doing the back testing and see if your rating or if your model algorithm is correct. If somebody think Daniel is going to have a big chance of defaulting, so give him a big rate. Is that really true in the end of the day, or it will be the other way around, which will be worse because you think he might actually bear little or no risk, but in the end of the day, he's actually going to legal actions and all the way to foreclosure, and eventually the bank has the loss. And the other part of the model will be actually trying to predict the loan loss, basically. So that will be one of my job. And since the last time we actually met, unfortunately, in a way, almost nothing particularly really advanced in my field, in my site. And so one of the big questions would be actually data, because obviously if you don't have data, there's nothing to predict. Like what are you going to really build? And I think a lot of organizations, either bank or small companies, the big challenge is this data is not automation. You might have spit out a report, a query here and there from different systems. At the end of the day, it will be all in either CSV file, and they might not be I guess in a united format. Some might even have different field name, for example. And if you have 10 or tens of Excel sheet with even hundreds of thousands of items every month, how are you really going to do your machine learning or try to move into that direction? And the next piece is what's the system? Obviously, not everybody is or have the capacity like RBC. So I don't know actually what system RBC has. But earlier, so we actually do have a Salesforce. So one of our team actually tried to use a little bit of machine learning in with Einstein, which is definitely easier in the market for even non-technical people like me. But again, with no data or no automation flowing into Salesforce, I didn't really push it in a sense for the whole last year. And at the time, there's another option of Cognos from, IBM Cognos, and they have their Watson. Funny thing, I think I just read some news, maybe last week, Watson seemed to be discontinued soon. So again, so that might be another interesting question. If you actually offer some system, and in 2 years your model or your system is no longer in the market, then what are you going to do? And then the $1 million question will be the debating about either R or Python. I actually invite two of my coworkers here. So one is the little younger guy. He actually had both skill. But again, once you build your model, let's say in Python, you don't want to rebuild in 2 years and realize I should have gone with the R and that kind of, I don't know what's the impact there, for example.
Yeah.
Like, do I really start over to train the machine, or is there anything that's salvageable?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I summarized everything you said into 3 questions. One is,
sure,
how do you deal with data in bigger orgs or smaller orgs or whatever?
Right.
So that actually is the $1 million question, not the third
Sure.
one. The second question was, sorry, what was the second question? Oh, the platforms. And the third question is Python versus R.
Right.
So I'll start from the end, which is the easiest.
Okay.
Python versus R, of course, Python. Like, who uses R? No, I'm joking. I'm not joking, actually. That's what I think. But it really depends on what you're trying to do. Like, for a lot, like R is R is not even a language, technically speaking, formally. So R is mostly a collection of statistical methods that you can use to do a lot of statistics related stuff, probably a lot more efficiently than Python. And therefore it is like super popular in things like political sciences, for example. In bioinformatics, it was like super popular, probably not anymore. But in areas that you need to do a lot of statistics really, really quickly, R is definitely a very, very good option.
Okay.
But if you want to do anything beyond that, normally a lot of these things are coming out of academia in, libraries and packages and GitHub repos that we start from. And a lot of these are in Python. So it's not like you have that many options in R when it comes to more advanced stuff. So most of the past 5-10 years, the advances, people just wrote things in Python. So now, of course, you can start rewriting everything in R, but do you want to do that? Or do you want to just use the existing libraries that are in Python and use them? And even like when we move on to deep learning, like things like PyTorch, or other frameworks, TensorFlow, etc. All of them have like Python APIs, but I'm not aware of R APIs in any of them. So that's generally an easier question to answer, and the answer is depends on what you're doing. If you're just doing pure statistics, probably R is a decent enough solution. If you're doing anything more advanced, most probably the libraries you need to use are in Python. So there is that. In terms of platforms, yes, there are like a zillion different platforms these days that, go all the way to no code machine learning. Like you can just literally drag and drop stuff and do machine learning with it. To, things that are like super low level and you have to still code a lot, but, it gives you a framework, etc. Is it dangerous to use these? Of course it is, because you're then married to a particular platform in terms like both as a practitioner and as an enterprise. Because as a practitioner, for example, I talk to a lot of people whose skill set is SaaS. Like they know a lot in SaaS, but when I'm interviewing them, they don't know how to do anything outside of SaaS. And that's useless because everything I'm doing is in Python. Like everything a lot of companies are doing in data science is in Python. Although SaaS is trying very hard to stay in the game, but the reality is that Python is the language everybody is using to deploy web applications. So, the fact that you know SaaS so much is not going to help you at all in this case, unless I want to hire you to turn my SaaS models into Python, which is, not super common, but that's a scenario I can imagine hire a SaaS person, for example. And that's the problem with platforms. Like if you get married to it, and if that's the totality of your skill set, then that's very problematic. So I generally, and even that's the problem with Python too. Like, I don't know, in 5 years, who knows if something else will replace Python, right? So in generally speaking, you shouldn't be too married to frameworks, to languages, et cetera, use what is needed. But importantly, I think you really need to be able to learn how to learn quickly. Like that's the most important skill beyond any of these frameworks or platforms, et cetera. So if you know the foundations, if you know how to learn quickly, then it doesn't matter. You can always keep up with the change. And also, not keeping up with the change is a very, very bad idea because things are moving so fast. If you don't do things right when they should happen, then very, very quickly your skill set becomes stale. Now to the first one. So data is a big problem. Everybody is trying to solve that. Every vendor is trying to sell a solution to enterprises to solve that. Small companies are struggling with it. Big companies are struggling with it. If there was a perfect solution, somebody would have been a billionaire somewhere. They probably are. But, again, it really depends on the scenario and use case, what the right approach is. But yeah, data is a big problem and there is no, so I guess in terms of what is relevant to this group is, for example, how to find data to do your personal projects, right? So that's an interesting question to discuss here. And I think the answer to that is, again, doesn't have a good answer. So you'll have to do creative things like scrape a bunch of data off of the internet, or use Kaggle. Kaggle has a lot of data sets. You don't have to do their challenges. You can just download their data sets and use them. And just literally Google on the internet, right? Things like, I don't know, baseball 2020 statistics. You probably will find something to download. So for personal projects, it's usually not too difficult to find some data set to start with. For things that are more complex, then you'll have to think about ways to acquire data by like buying data, et cetera. But also, I teach product development in our workshops, and a big part that I usually emphasize a lot is that you want to build, an alpha version of your web application as quickly as possible. And among many other reasons that you want to do that is the fact that if you have that, you can put it up on the web and use it to collect data. And that's super important because a lot of the time we waste a lot of time figuring out how to find data, while if you spend the same amount of time building an application, put it on the internet, getting a bunch of people to use it, you would collect that data very easily. So again, long story short, it really depends on a scenario about how to handle that data. You're muted.
Thank you so much for that. And do we have any more questions from the people in the audience? Please ask your questions. Or Faraz, you have a question?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead. Thank you.
Yeah, so I was wondering, I guess most of us here are looking to start a career in data science. And I was wondering which one is better to start that career in a big corporation like RBC, or like in smaller companies, startups. I mean, you had the experience to work in RBC, and I kind of have a feeling that there was some reason that you came out of it, like after 3 years. I just want to know more about this. Like, how is it? Like, is it better to work in that environment or smaller settings have more growth? Just want to know your insight on
that. Feeling bad that I'm answering every question by it depends, but it depends. Okay, so I worked at RBC for 3 years, and I usually joke that I stayed there 6 times more than I should have. I'm not a corporate person. I hated 90% of my time there. Like this, I guess, especially because I was pulled into management very quickly. I was affected by the whole politics of the environment, and I just disliked it very much. So, and my plan always was to work in a startup. I didn't necessarily know that I wanted to start my own, but I ended up deciding that I wanted. So, okay, digression. So the answer to your question is, if the biggest difference is that a corporate is extremely slow, which is a very bad environment for when you know what you want. But it is a perfect environment for when you're starting, for example, because nobody's going to push you, when somebody didn't end up in production in time. Nobody cares. Like they might pretend they do, but they don't really. Like nothing is going to change. So that's a great environment to get up to speed, learn about a business, learn about the technical stuff. It's just the right environment to start, I think. While if you go to a startup, I could be messaging my CTO at 11 p.m. saying the website is down, do something, and he has to do something because the website is down and there's nobody else who can fix it, right? So, and if you are an engineer and something that you worked on goes down and I message you, it doesn't matter that it's 3 a.m., you have to fix it. So, that's like just the contrast of startup versus corporate. Like corporate, you're a tiny, completely unimportant piece of the machine. And I'm not saying it in a derogatory way. It's good. It just means that it is a very self-sustaining system. Whatever you do, is not going to make a big impact, good or bad. So perfect environment to get started. But if you're an ambitious person, if you want to do things your way, etc., after a while, you're going to get tired of it, and you probably will move on to a different team within the same enterprise or a different enterprise, etc., until eventually you find something that you like. Especially these days with all the innovation labs that all the enterprises are starting, they're trying to create startup-like environments that are like more agile and more lean and all that in big enterprises. I have my own opinions about how successful those are, but there are those options too, which are better than the cold, good old enterprise side, like the corporate side. But definitely it will take you a few job hops to find what you should be doing with your life, but that's just a natural way of things happening.
Good thing you mentioned about job hopping. Is it a bad thing to like work in a company for 6 months and then go to another one? Like, is it perceived in a bad way in your resume, or?
Depends on how good you are. If people are competing to hire you, no. But if you're like the other 99.99% of people, 6 months is probably going to look suspicious if it repeats if it happens a couple of times, it's fine. But if I pick up your resume and I see that you have 4 6-month positions, unless they were contract, then I'll definitely question your commitment. And unless I'm hiring for a 6 months contract, in which case your resume is going to be perfect. It's going to be very, and hiring is normally a very costly process for the employers. Like they have to put in their stuff to hire you, and it's not you. Like when I posted things at RBC, in the first 2 days I would get 400 resumes. So I have to go through all that 400 resume, bring it down to 10, interview those for several rounds, then go through the paperwork. It's a lot of time commitment. So I'm not going to do that if I think that you're going to leave in a few months. So
I'm looking for a long-term commitment, basically.
Yeah.
Like it makes more sense for it.
Yeah. I don't think any employer believes that you would stay there for long, but at least they're going to weed out the cases that they think the person is probably going to leave. Yeah. That said, it's a completely natural. I think the average lifetime of a data scientist in a role is about either 18 months or 2 years. So that part is pretty standard. Like a lot of people have accepted that that's the case. It's not like you're going to stay with the same company for 30 years.
Okay, I had just one more question. If someone is looking for kind of a growth to start as a data scientist, but kind of go toward the more executive roles,
yep.
What's your advice to them?
Just do what you said.
Like I don't want to end up like I don't know, just being beside a computer. Like doing the coding for like the next 10 years. I want to see some growth in that side. Yeah. Like what's important to get there?
Yeah.
Is it the soft skills? Is it the setting? Yeah. I don't know. Maybe all.
It is a combination of many factors. Obviously, it depends. So the most important thing is being at the right place at the right time, beyond anything else. And of course, part of that is luck. You just have to be lucky to be in that place at the right time. But part of it is, how you play your cards. So, for example, the reason that I was pulled into management very quickly was that, you know, I showed a lot of leadership. It wasn't like I just came in, went to a corner, started doing shit and left, right? Like I always try to engage with the team. I try to get them to do stuff, et cetera, et cetera. Like there are, usually they say that you start doing, you know, the responsibilities of the role that you want to be in, and then people notice you and take you to that role. So that's how it's going to happen. Like you have to show that on technical level, you're capable of delivering, et cetera, et cetera. But then on the engagement with the people, like if you want to be a people management, you have to be able to move people. You have to be able to motivate people. Like, are you showing any sign of that? And hopefully if you're doing that and, you know, you have good relationships with management, they notice you. If an opportunity comes up, you go up, et cetera, et cetera. But sometimes you do all of the things right and the opportunity doesn't come up because, you know, there is no headcount, et cetera, which means that you just have to, you know, move on to a different company, different team to take a management role. And usually, you know, this continuous career improvements happens by going to a different team rather than, you know, jumping too high in your current team. Sometimes people even, you know, I don't know, there are a manager somewhere, they go to a different team, become a senior manager, come back to the same team in a director or senior director role, etc. So, like, for example, I don't know, I don't think I would ever do that, but I was at RBC, I was a senior manager, I left, I'm doing my company for 3 years. I could imagine going back and becoming a VP. If I had stayed there for 3 years, that probably would not have been possible. So, you know, there are many ways to get there. It's just a matter of playing your cards right. But the most important thing is showing, like starting to do the responsibilities of the next role before you're noticed to be pulled into that role.
Thank you so much, Amir.
No problem.
Thank you, Amir. That's very detailed answer. I like the way you answer questions, very detailed and very practical. So please, we still have 26 more minutes. Please ask your questions. Or do you want me to start asking people to ask questions? I'm joking, just joking. Yeah, maybe you can take from the questions that.
Oh yeah, I could do that too. What I wanted to say was that if people, you know, are getting tired, like I know it is late too, what we could do is, you know, as I said, I'm going to share my one-on-one meeting link, and you can definitely, you know, book me in. Like what I have found is that people talk about things a lot more comfortably in one-on-one settings, and I'm happy to do that. So we can definitely do that. I'm just going to quickly look at the questions and see if there's anything that we didn't cover. Let's see.
And while you're looking at the question, there's a question of entrepreneurship I want to ask. So how has it been for you? What was the strategy before you made the jump into entrepreneurship? And what are some of the, what are your advice for someone who may be considering that down the line, or someone who is currently doing that for an entrepreneur, to the entrepreneurship route?
Yeah. So to be an entrepreneur, to be a founder, you need 3 things. You need capital, like you need money.
Mm-hmm.
You need social capital, which is customers, partners, etc. And you need sort of a technical capital, if you like either you know how to build stuff, or you know somebody who knows how to build the stuff and you can convince them to do it for you. So before making the jump, and a lot of people don't do this, which has, you know, good and it has pros and cons, but ultimately these are the 3 things you need at the same time in the same place for you to be a successful founder. Like if you don't have any of these, you're going to fail for sure. Mm-hmm. So before making the jump, however much of that you can build is going to really help you. So, for example, for the social capital part, I built a community. I built a pretty large AI community. So through that, I met my co-founder. I met my, a lot of the people who are users and some people who are clients, et cetera, et cetera. I saved very rigorously. Like I saved a lot of my money during, like while I was working at RBC, because I knew I was going to need it for a few years before I can even pay myself. And on the technical side, well, I was technical, but I wasn't a software engineer. So I purposefully looked for somebody with software engineering a skill set who ended up being my partner. Like he's my co-founder now. And yeah, so if you have as much of that as you, like, obviously you shouldn't overdo it. Like you shouldn't, take forever to build these. There's no perfect thing. At some point, you just have to make a leap of faith and be like, fuck it, I'm going to do it. But, as much as you can build before you make the jump is just going to help you. Mm-hmm. And if you do it without those and you don't have a good way to get them, then that's problematic. Mm-hmm. But at least the fact that you need these and be proactive about finding ways to get them, it's just going to, it's funny. I posted on LinkedIn a few days ago that I did another interview like this a few days ago, like a couple of weeks ago. And the person asked me a very, very similar question, like, what does it take to start a company? And later, I was talking to my girlfriend about it, and she said that, in her opinion, my most important characteristic that probably will help me succeed is that I'm very stubborn. And I think that's right. Like, even if you don't have those, if you're stubborn, you'll figure out how to do those. But you have to know that you need those. Like if you're stubborn and looking at the wrong place for the wrong thing, that's not going to help you.
Thank you. Thank you. So maybe you want to check out. Okay.
I have a question.
Right.
Yeah. So Amir, like, where do you see the future of data science going? Like, and I had a conversation with one person a few weeks back. He was saying the role of data scientist might not exist like 5 years down the line because even that portion of it is automated. So like, I would like to hear your opinion on that.
Honestly, one of the most important reasons that I went to management instead of staying technical was that I felt that way. I felt like data science in the form that I was doing was not going to last. And later, like, I decided even the management of data science teams in the form that we were doing it was not going to last. So I just, pulled the plug and went all the way to the foundership and all. But definitely, like the generalist data scientist, I don't even think that these days anybody is hiring generalist data scientists. And that's why the very, very first thing that I said is make sure you emphasize your strength, which is your domain knowledge, for example. Because that will be extremely helpful. Like, if you're coming from a background that has some sort of a business flavor to it, that's super important because a lot of the generalist data scientists, they just know the math and coding and they don't necessarily have that business acumen. So that's one way to, again, like make your profile unique. The other way is, and this is like definitely becoming more and more commonplace, that the expectation is that the data scientists know the engineering side. So you not only modeling, but know how to write clean code and deploy it, set it up as API, et cetera, et cetera. So that's definitely, like, even myself, like 3 years ago, when I was hiring for my NLP team at RBC, I never hired anyone that was general purpose data scientist. I either hired a PhD who can design algorithms or somebody who can deploy code. There was nobody in the middle. So you need to have your niche. So engineering is another way to do it. Product is another way to do it, in my opinion, and that's the route that I took. Like I just decided that my niche in data science is product. So yeah, and you know, obviously, as I said, the domain, like a data scientist in investment, you know, they use specific techniques, blah, blah, blah. So you have to put some sort of a flavor in your data science. Otherwise, generalist data scientist is going to be very difficult. And of course, another way that is less ideal, but is still completely valid is if you're very good in one technical area. So for example, NLP, again, was something that I picked very early on as my specialty. And that really helped me brand myself. And also in interviews, it is a lot more clear, like, because I knew a lot more about NLP than anything else. And that I think is also very helpful if you have a specialty in particular technical area.
Okay, so maybe you can take one of the questions while we wait for the people on this.
I think we've talked about most of them.
Okay.
Honestly, I don't think there is. Yeah, I don't think there's anything that we didn't talk about.
Okay. So can you share with us for people who are PhD students or who have MSc, who are newcomers to Canada and are trying to get a job in data science, data analysis, or maybe like a general word of advice as to how you think from your own experience and also from people you've interfaced with, how you think that they can navigate that journey? I know you've mentioned about doing a side project, but you know, maybe practical steps that they can take to navigate their journey that has helped you or that you've heard or you've seen from people.
I'm again going to give a non-answer because I have a much better answer in an article that I wrote. I'm going to put it in the chat. So that question was a very, very common question that I was getting. And over time, I collected a bunch of different answers that I gave to people. At some point, I just compiled the whole thing into an article. So this article is going to tell you a lot of what I don't have time to tell you. So definitely read that. But the long story short is there are really a few factors. One is you have to learn how to talk like a data scientist. Like a lot of the time you have the technical skills, but you're just not using the right phrases. You don't know how to talk about the business problems, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to learn how to do that. And you can do that in two ways. One is through just doing more projects, but two is through talking to data scientists. So just talking to a bunch of data scientists and see how they talk about the problems they solve is going to really help you figure out how to explain stuff in a way that is relevant in a data science context. And the importance of that is that, for example, in an interview, if you're answering the question right, but you're not using the right phrases to answer, the person who's hearing your answer might not understand that you're giving the right question, and they might dismiss you thinking that you didn't know why you did. You're just not using the right phrases. And just, you know, figuring out, like, again, going back to an answer that I gave previously, just being able to tell good stories is very important. And that's something that comes with practice of talking to people and building projects, et cetera, et cetera. The second most important thing is networking. It is almost 5 times more likely to get a job through a referral than through an online application. And that's a stat that I pulled out of thin air, but I'm pretty sure that that's correct. So, and I can tell you the logic, like why that's the case. So, as I told you, when I posted a job at RBC, in the first 2 days, I would get 400 resumes. So imagine that in a week, it's several hundred resumes. And what will happen is that the recruiter will essentially look at all of these and pick a bunch of them for me to look at. And let's say that's 100 resumes. So I have to look at 100 resumes in 10, 15-minute times that I have between my meetings. How much attention do you realistically think that I will have to each of them? Pretty much none. So I'm just going to stare at them for a minute and be like, yeah. And that's going to happen to most of the resumes, including yours, although it is very good. While if it comes to a referral, it just goes to a different stack that is probably 10, 20 resumes. And I'm probably going to look at those. Like I'm going to pick, I don't know, 30 resumes from the 100 resume stack and look at it in 5 minutes. While in a different 5 minute, I might be looking at 10 resumes that came through referrals. So super simple math. I just simply spend more time on referrals, which means that you have a larger chance of being noticed. Like that's even, not talking about all the other impacts of, one of my employees vouching that you're a good person to hire. Like that makes a huge difference. Like even like the very, very basic fact that I look at your resume for longer means that it's more likely that I would pick out your resume to interview. So, and the way you can get there is through networking and through getting people to refer you, et cetera, et cetera. And ultimately it would be very weird if you only reached out to people when you need them. So you have to start building relationships way before you need them so that then you can go back to them and say, yo, I'm looking into this. Can you introduce me to this person that is hiring, et cetera, et cetera. I usually say that a role that I got at RBC was through a fourth connection. So my friend, like at the time, I knew nobody at RBC, but I had a friend whose brother was at RBC in the business, who knew a data engineer, who knew the hiring manager. So I went through all of these to get a referral and, pass my resume to the hiring manager. So, and all of this was through, asking people that I'm looking into this, do you know anybody who can help? And LinkedIn makes it very easy too. Like you can look at your second order connections and see who can introduce you to somebody else, et cetera, et cetera. You just have to be proactive about it. But building relationships beforehand so that you have as many first connections as possible is going to be very, very helpful.
Thank you so much for that. And a follow-up question to that is, a lot of people dread networking, but how do I build that connection in such a way that it doesn't seem transactional? How do I build that relationship that it doesn't seem transactional?
Well, go to people before you need them. I'm saying it a little, in a slightly snobbish way, but that's what it is, right? Mm-hmm. So if you come to me and ask me, I need you to do this, how much can I trust that you actually cared about me, right? Mm-hmm. While if you, come forward and genuinely say, I'm interested in blah, 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 can we talk? And if we connect, then, later, if you come back and say, well, actually, I need this, can you help me with it? I'm probably 10 times more likely to help you because, now I trust you. I don't feel like you're just using me for your objective. And that's just the human nature. A very good way to get over the initial barrier, like a lot of people feel awkward doing that. Like over time, I learned that worst case scenario, I message somebody and they don't respond. I just move on to somebody else. But, at first it is very awkward. So, and in environments like this is really good. So for example, when we do social events, one of the things that we do is that we do breakouts. Like on Zoom, you can do breakouts, for example. And part of it is just for people to talk to each other, get to know each other, exchange their contacts, et cetera, et cetera. And that's a very good way for you to know a bunch of people who become your first order connections for, future warm introductions. And since I met you in this context, you know, next time if I reach out to you and say, can you do this thing for me? It's not weird anymore because, you know, I know you from somewhere. It's not like you just added me to sell something to me or to ask me for a referral, etc., etc. Some people do it in the most wrong way. Like I remember so many people messaging me saying, can you please refer me for this link? And I'd be like, I don't know who the fuck you are. Like, why would I do that? So, you know, building that relationship, building that trust, building that credit is very important in order for the relationship not to be transactional.
Thank you. Thank you so much. But to follow up on that still, can you give an example of somebody that did it with you and they blew you away? Like you were very, very impressed with the way they established that relationship and you were willing to stick out your neck for them and put your social capital on the line for them.
Blew me away. I don't think that's the right question to ask.
Okay.
Because what that question is implying is that there is a way to do it that immediately is going to make a huge difference. I'm sure there is. But in most settings, relationship is something that you have to build over time. Like the strongest, like I would, you know, go way out of my way for somebody that I know for a long time. I interacted with them a lot. They've done a favor for me. I've done a favor for them, blah, blah, blah. There is a literal relationship. You know, that cannot be faked. Like that's super important. You cannot fake that. You cannot send me a message that creates that emotion in me.
Yeah.
That emotion only exists because I interacted with you a bunch of times, right? Like in that article, one of the things that I say is that, you know, when you want, even if you want to ask somebody for a referral, don't ask them that. You know, go in and say, I'm curious to know about your role. Have a genuine conversation with them. Show an interest in them. And you don't have, like, if you fake it, they'll figure it out. Like, don't fake it. Like, be actually curious about what they do, because it is also important to you to know what environment do they work on, what do they do every day, blah, blah, blah. So when you take that approach, you've taken an interest in them. It doesn't feel transactional. You have created a relationship. It's a very short-term relationship, but, you know, it is a relationship. It's not just like, I don't feel like, look, like ultimately I ignore every single message that I feel like that person is sending it to 100 people. But if I feel like that person has put in some effort, like, you know, he's pointing out something that is important to me, he's pointing out something that I did recently, etc., etc. Like they've taken the time to craft a message to ask for my time, then I'm more likely to give them my time. While if I feel like this person is just messaging 600 people with the most beautiful message ever, I'll probably just going to ignore it because people are not idiots. They're just going to see it through all the BS, right? So.
All right. Thank you so much, Amir. Thank you for your honest, candid, and open conversation. This is a really, really good conversation. And thank you for giving 1 hour, 30 minutes of your time on a Thursday evening when you could have just been relaxing and probably getting some work done. So thank you so much. If there's anyone on the call who has any question before we round. Okay, Nazir, so go ahead. So this will be the last question before we end the conversation.
Okay. Hi, Amir. Thank you so much for all the information that you have provided so far. Basically, two takeaways would be the thing that you said about being unique. So my question is about projects, what you said. So I worked in the financial industry. I moved over from US, so we used to work with a bunch of huge volumes of data. So just understanding if I'm doing a personal project, like you said, if you're putting out on your resume or do a personal project and explain it to the hiring managers if you're applying for a job, it's usually, what about the level of complexity? So if I'm doing a personal project based on a data set, it might not be as complex as what actually happens in the real life. Like say, for example, the models or the things that you've developed in RBC.
Yep.
So how do you, what should I say, compensate for the difference in complexity or detailedness in an interview or when you're talking to the hiring manager?
Yeah. It really depends on where the complexity is. So building an end-to-end pipeline in an enterprise is complex, not because the model is complex, but mostly because of the organizational complexity, because of the infrastructure complexity, et cetera, et cetera. And unless I'm hiring you as an infrastructure engineer, I don't expect you to deal with those things. So what I want to see from you is, your ability to handle, the data pipeline end to end. So the complexity that I expect you to be able to handle is, on the, data cleaning and, data pipelines and feature engineering and modeling and evaluating and deploying probably, et cetera, et cetera. So as long as your project contains those components with a reasonable complexity, then it's all good. One misconception is that companies use complex models. They don't. They use whatever solves their business problem. A lot of the time, it's simple logistic regression, honestly. So don't feel like in interviews, they might ask you deep learning questions, but then when you start working, you're just deploying logistic regression. So, as long as you have a reasonably, complex problem and demonstrate problem solving, which is the most important thing, problem solving skills, then you're good. Like, I don't think you need to do anything. You don't need to worry about building something that is super complex. But, tying your project to some real world problem is normally an interesting way to compensate for that, because you would end up with a more interesting narrative about what you did that is going to be helpful when you're talking about it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. That's what I said.
Thank you so much, Amir. And thank you, everyone, for also spending your time. And for those people that asked questions and those people that couldn't ask questions, please reach out to Amir. He's been open and he's been very, 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 very candid about his feedback. And if you would like to book a 20-minute session with him, please go ahead and do that. I have done that. And I can tell you that was what led to this conversation. And he's genuinely committed to helping other people. He's not just one of those people that will say it and won't do anything around it. He walks the talk. So I want to say thank you. Sometime a few days ago, I was thinking, as I was preparing for this session, I was thinking about it, that how does this man make time out with all these things he's doing and he still set time to do that? That's for him to be able to do that. I commend him for that and I give him kudos. So thank you so much. And thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your evening. And we still have more sessions upcoming. Please go to the website to check it out. If you're interested, please sign up. We'll be loading up the remaining ones for the rest of the year very soon in the next few days. But again, thank you so much. And some of the questions that he has also answered or that you have, you can also check out the podcast. Some of those answers are there on the podcast. So please go ahead and avail yourself of all those resources. They're free and we don't have intention of charging you any money for that. Please utilize them. And we also want you to know that at Fresh Start Hub, we are rooting for your success and we wish you all the best. Enjoy the rest of your evening and have a great week.
Thanks for having me. I put the link to the article, to my 20-minute session, and to the workshop that we have with a 50% discount in the chat. You can click on the 3 dots and save the chat so that you have that, because you're going to lose it when we hang up.
All right. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Bye.
you. Thank
Bye
you
now.
so much.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Have a good night.
Thank you. Bye-bye.